dawn's early light, what so proudly we hail, and the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched, were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red flare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please rise, everyone. Our Heavenly Father, as we gather here today, let us take a moment to reflect on the values we hold dear: service, fellowship, and commitment to the greater good. We are grateful for the opportunity to come together, united in our common purpose to make a positive impact in our communities and the world. May we approach this meeting with open minds and compassionate hearts. Let us inspire one another with our ideas and efforts, recognizing the strength in our diversity and the power of collaboration. Thank you for this gathering and the work we do. May our collective spirit shine brightly as we embark on a journey to serve others. Amen. Amen. May you see it. I'd like to take the time to welcome our guest today. My company name, if you will, please stand. We recognize Pam Schreiber, guest John Schreiber, so Pam. Ty Daly, guest Vince Erickson, so Ty. Emily Morrison, guest Dr. Ed Schwartz, and Jerry Schwartz, guest Tyler Martin, so Jimmy. Thank you, welcome to our guests.
Today, and I just pictured in my head this song, the police, the do, rock, and so this is your reminder to pay your dues if you haven't paid them yet. See how it is. Next we have a couple of new members to formally introduce to the club. I'm Guy Ramsey and Whitney McGregor. Up to the podium as well as Krista Stewart and Brody. Ramsey is Whitney's sponsor, and you've probably seen her come around. She brought us cookies one time in case you one on Twitter. And same with Brody, but we want to formally introduce them to you and welcome.
Whitney is a McLean County native. She was raised in Robinson, and after becoming a registered nurse, she worked in home health administration and spent the last 12 years of her career at United Health Group. Her most recent role there is clinical project implementation manager. In addition to becoming a Rotarian this last year, she is also a provisional junior league with Waco Rivers. In her spare time, she enjoys volunteering and cheering for the Texas Rangers and Dallas Stars. She also loves animals and spends time with family and friends. So please join me in welcoming Whitney to the club.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce Brody McGeesy, our newest Rotarian. We realized recently that he's been attending for a while, but we hadn't had a formal introduction, so this is today. Brody comes to us under the classification of associations. He is the district executive for the Boy Scouts of America, or I guess now Scouting America here in heart of Texas district, which is our local area. Brody is it kind of hurts my heart to say this, a class of 23 at Texas A&M, which means that there is dirt that's younger than I am around. Brody's a hard-working young man, and we are looking forward to having him in the Boy Scouts and affiliated with Rotary. And so please welcome Brody.
Thank you so much. Next, you're going to have Rosemary Mays come to the podium to about sponsorships, and then introduce our student best for the day.
Okay.
Do you want the mic?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Rosemary's never seen your tongue.
I just came from rehab. I thought I had the school colors of Lavega today, but I missed it by one. I was gonna say I dressed in the school colors, but I didn't. The first order of business is our Youth Citizenship Awards luncheon is coming up the 24th of March. And as you may recall, last year we were able to have all the tables sponsored. This year we have 24 applications. They are outstanding youth of all the high schools in the Gwinnett County. I know you'll enjoy the program. We already have, how many? 11 are already sponsored, so I have the sponsorship forms today, so before we leave here today, I'd really like to sew this up and have all the sponsorships taken care of again. The sponsorship is $250, and that covers the students, the school administrators, and the parents that come to support the students at that luncheon. So mark that on your calendar and make sure you contribute by supporting us a table before you leave today. So with that, I'm going to ask Ruben and Kata to come up. Senator State, I am really thankful to their counselor, the college counselor at Lavega High School, Mr. Saul Acosta. He has been involved with all of our Rotary programs, both the student awards program as well as student guests. And I don't know if any of you realize, but we have not had student guests this Rotary year. And we've been scrambling to get a chairman of the committee, and it just hasn't worked out. And I was kind of out for a little while. So I had an email from Sal that says, "Are y'all doing student guests this year?" And I said, "We certainly are. What meeting would you like to come to?" So we have student guests today. First, I will introduce Kata. Kata Wayne. She is the senior at Lavega High School. Her mother is Naomi Wayne. She is a Chick-fil-A Leader Academy member in endorsement in public service health science. She is very active in many other activities at Lavega High School. She is a student. Can you tell me what that says? Because these glasses aren't working. This one here. Shepherd's Heart food pantry. So she's an active young lady. She has exciting future plans, and I'm going to let her tell you all about it.
After high school, I plan to go to MCC for my first 2 years in nursing, get my associates, and I plan to transfer for my bachelor's in nursing, and also plan to specialize in labor delivery nursing.
Next, we have Ruben Reed III, a Lavega High School senior also. Rosanna Carpenter is his mom. He's in band, theater, National Honor Society, and Early College High School. His community activities include Up and Down. And I'm going to let Ruben, who Kate Paul cleared up, he's never had a Reuben sandwich, tell you about his future plans.
I'm Ruben. I plan on attending the University of Texas at Austin and majoring in architecture. After that, I plan on getting a bachelor's degree and trying to start my own firm.
again, let me introduce Mr. Simon Ostra, the college counselor at WWII High School. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rosemary. Now we will have our chair of the day, Lou Aaron, come to the podium to introduce our speaker of the day.
So, that's the only word I know is Japanese. What that means, thank you very much, Tim. Well, we're going to be thrilled today to have the chance to hear about the Japanese American internment camps directly from a family member whose family endured the experience. Notice I said Japanese American because the Japanese who were interned were legal U.S. residents. Well, Joanna Dana's Rotary announcement explains much of what David's background has experienced, and I'll highlight a couple of things, one of which is Dave is an Air Force ROTC graduate and an ex-ICBM officer, and now studies at the Army War College, working on is also a chief historian, but he's working on his PhD. He'll be defending his thesis this summer. We're so happy to have him here, but I wanted to say that most published information on this subject come from journalists who claim to be scholars, but have never experienced this direct firsthand the subject. Now, this is such a unique situation, so I want you to hear the story behind the story from Air Force Captain David Warner. Please welcome him.
Well, thank you, Luke, for that very kind introduction, and thank you to the Waco Rotary Club for the generous invitation to speak to you today. Just a test, can everyone hear me in the back? Good. We're doing a sound test before and civil levels here. So, if I may, I'd like to give just a personal point here so you can see what my connection is to the subject of Japanese internments. So, this is my mother, Lillian Yoshiko Ogata, and she was only 2 months old when she was sent to Manzanar Internment Center in Southern California. And this picture was taken of her on Easter morning of 1945. Now, my mother really has no memories of her time in internment, but of course, I grew up knowing my grandparents, many great uncles, aunts, and cousins. And they shared their stories with me growing up, and so that influenced me a lot growing up. And then, of course, as I became a graduate student and really studied this deeply, my views still took on a much more nuanced take on what happened. And so I'm assuming that most people have probably at least heard something about Japanese American internment either in high school or in college, but I will at least go through some of the basics of who, what, when, where, and why, as to how it happened. But also, I'd like to make clear this is not intended to be an all-encompassing, exhaustive presentation on Japanese internment. I'm going to focus mainly on the experiences of the people who went through it, but also delve into some of the historical events that led up to it. Because I think when I look at the history textbooks and curriculum that we have, they really do not do justice to the events that led up to it, which go back more than a decade. But I'd like to go through at least the highlights of what had happened. So, basics, what was Japanese internment? It was the forced removal and relocation of roughly 120,000 Japanese living on the west coast of the United States. And the two broad categories of Japanese entered were Issei, that's the Japanese word for first generation. So these were immigrants from Japan who settled here in the late 19th, early 20th century, and then their children, the Nisei, which means second generation Japanese. And the Nisei, of course, were all American citizens by virtue of their birth year. And all of their Nisei parents, although they were not citizens, they were not permitted to have citizenship until 1952. All of them were permanent legal residents of the United States. So they were still entitled to due process as permanent legal residents. And when did it happen? Beginning with the signing of Executive Order 9066 by Franklin Roosevelt on February 19, 1942, that order called for the evacuation of Japanese from what they call the Western Exclusion Zone, and I'll bring up a map of it in a moment. Basically, anything within 150 miles, anyone living within 150 miles of the west coast of the United States was forced within their homes and reported to the internment centers. So you can see here the map of the western coast of the United States, and sorry, the print is a little bit smaller, but these are the assembly centers where they first had to report, and then ultimately there were 10 permanent internment camps in various parts of the interior of the United States, and they were all in very remote areas to prevent anyone from potentially escaping. And then we get to the why, and this, of course, is the most debated question and topic of this period of American history. And some of the traditional reasons as to why Japanese internment happened really come down to wartime hysteria in wake of the attack on Pearl Harbor, also elements such as racism, xenophobia, nativism, and of course all of these things play a factor. There's no question about that. But I think too often we reduce it to these very simple excuses, and in fact there was a lot that led up to it, and long before Pearl Harbor happened. But I do highlight here some of the propaganda that was being circulated throughout the United States. On the right, you can see a U.S. War Department propaganda piece, and of course, I'm sure most of you will be familiar with the ones that they had portraying Nazis and Italian fascists at the time. And of course, one very sad caricature cartoon here in the middle, I'm not sure if you see it on the screen. It depicts Japanese Americans on the West Coast as fifth column members, and they're all lining up to grab boxes of TNT to commit acts of sabotage. And this cartoon, sadly, unfortunately, was drawn by Theodore Seuss Guys, otherwise known as Dr. Seuss. So it took him many years to get this done. So for historical context, I go back a decade, and a basic timeline here of the events that I think played the most significant role in shaping the American public's view of the Japanese in the United States and any potential threats that they perceived from them. So in the summer of 1931, there was the Mukden incident in China. And the Mukden incident was a false flag or staged operation by mid-level officers in the Japanese army. And what they did was they planted explosives on the Manchurian railway and detonated it. And they made it look as if it had been done by Chinese saboteurs. And they used this incident as a pretext to invade Manchuria and most of northern China. And afterwards they established the puppet state of Manchukuo, and they installed the former Chinese Emperor Pu Yi as the head of state of his government. If any of you have seen the movie The Last Emperor with John Lone, it covers a great deal of this. And now the Mukden incident was important because this alarmed virtually every Western nation that had large Japanese populations living in their borders. They were suspicious about whether or not similar incidents of sabotage might take place on their own home soil. And it also was the moment when the FBI and U.S. Naval Intelligence started conducting surveillance on Japanese living in the United States. one of the main reasons I did that is because in San Francisco, there were riots and protests, but not by white Americans, but by Chinese. There were protests all throughout San Francisco, Japantown, and Japanese shopkeepers and homeowners boarded up their stores. They were very fearful of what might happen. Now, luckily, these protests did not devolve into violence. But again, this really sent shockwaves throughout the country. And you can see here, it was reported in the Chicago Daily Tribune, the Monday incident. And this was reported in major U.S. newspapers for months. So it was very much in the consciousness of the American people. And then, of course, we fast forward to 1937, after the Marco Polo Bridge incident, followed the full invasion of China by the Japanese, which resulted first in the Nanking Massacre. And I did not want to show photos from that incident, but you can see it was front page news in the New York Times. And again, all throughout the world, people were very alarmed by this and by Japan's aggression in East Asia. And at this time, the U.S. State Department and the foreign ministries of countries all throughout North and South America who had Japanese populations, they were all in fairly regular contact with each other and just sharing information and saying, are you seeing any acts of sabotage? So this is really where the alarmism started to take place. And then on December 12, 1937, you had the sinking of the USS Panay. So this is when the Nanking Massacre was still going on. The Massacre of Nanking occurred all through the month of December 1937 through the end of January 1938. And the USS Panay, I'm not sure if you can see that this was a New York Times, front page New York Times story. The USS Panay was a United States Navy gunboat that patrolled the Yangtze River. This was part of the Yangtze River Patrol that was established after the Boxer Rebellion, and it was intended to protect American interests in China, mostly our oil companies. But on December 12th, the USS Panay went in to aid in the rescue and relief efforts of American expats who were living in Nanking. They also took on a few Chinese refugees at the same time. Now, the USS Panay radioed Japanese forces and notified them of their presence there, that they were coming in to evacuate U.S. expatriates, and the Japanese confirmed their position. But then immediately as they were leaving port, Japanese dive bombers came in and sank the Panay and killed a number of Americans and Chinese on board. And again, this sparked enormous outrage in the United States. But of course, fearful that there might be war, the U.S. ambassador to Japan met with the Japanese foreign minister, and they negotiated a settlement. Japan apologized profusely and paid $2 million in reparations to the families of the victims and to replace the Panay. But again, this was a major story all throughout the United States, and it sparked just as much outrage as the Massacre of Nanking itself. And then a series of events leading into 1941, again, just fed the fire and the diplomatic tensions between the United States and Japan. You see here the signing of the Tripartite Pact between Italy, Germany, and Japan. And again, this is the reason why this was so alarming for us is because at this time, Germany was already at war with our ally, Great Britain. And for Japan to ally themselves with Germany, again, just led to the further breakdown of diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Japan. And then throughout 1940 and 1941, there were a series of trade embargoes that Franklin Roosevelt imposed on the Japanese. First, he started by cutting off shipments of U.S. steel and other scrap metal to Japan, which seriously hindered Japan's war effort in China. But then the one that really put them on their heels was the U.S. oil embargo of August 1941, which of course was intended to sort of starve the Japanese war machine and force them to capitulate, to withdraw from China. That was the intent of the United States. But of course, it just made Japan more desperate to put them on the war footing. Now, this is an incident that is rarely covered in history books. I've certainly never seen it covered in our U.S. history curriculum in our textbooks. This was the Tachibana espionage incident, which occurred in 1941, in the summer of 1941. Itaru Tachibana was a lieutenant commander in the Japanese Imperial Navy, and he was an intelligence officer. But he was in the United States posing as a student at the University of Southern California. And for more than a year, he was gathering intelligence on U.S. military capabilities, mostly our naval shipyards in Los Angeles, our western defenses, and he was also actively trying to recruit informants to send information to the Japanese government. And he was also communicating through the Japanese consulate in Los Angeles. And if I may, I'd like to play just a quick video from a documentary that was made by one of my professors, actually, that covered this portion of the
Pedro and Michael are visiting the Olympic Hotel, which played a key role in the spy story.
So this is it. Here we are. The Olympic Hotel.
According to the once-secret files, this was a Japanese spy nest. The espionage network was led by an agent named Itaru Tachibana. This is where he met his fellow agents.
Itaru Tachibana was one of the many Japanese officers sent to America routinely during the 20s and the 30s to quote-unquote study English.
But Itaru Tachibana is no student. He's a commander in the Japanese Navy. His primary mission, hunt for information on the U.S. Navy.
And knowing that this was going on in Los Angeles is really something special.
Michael and Pedro have come to one of Tachibana's favorite spots, San Pedro. In the 1930s, this point overlooked the U.S. Pacific Fleet in Long Beach. L.A. had been the fleet's home port until it moved to Pearl Harbor in 1940.
Japanese naval officers would come up to places like this and monitor our fleet running in and out.
Along with naval fleet movements, Tachibana records data on every imaginable U.S. vital asset.
What kind of highways did we have? What kind of port facilities did we have? What kind of air bases did we have? Japanese naval intelligence was quite broad in what they wanted.
Tachibana also wants to recruit spies. In 1941, naval intelligence break into the Japanese consulate in Los Angeles. Inside a safe, they make a startling discovery.
The Office of Naval Intelligence found a list of 3,000 Japanese Americans named by address. And what the list was that they were proud Americans and could not be trusted by the Japanese government.
Instead, the Japanese spy master Tachibana has more success recruiting non-Japanese American spies, including Caucasian factory and shipyard workers. In the spring of 1941, Tachibana attempts to bribe a washed-up silent film actor and former Navy man named Al Blake. He boasts that he has a friend stationed at Pearl Harbor. But Blake secretly double-crosses Tachibana and fingers it to naval intelligence.
Naval intelligence where he laid it and said, oh, maybe for once we can really find out what's happening, because he didn't really have a firm idea on how the Japanese Navy were conducting the intelligence operation in America.
So I thought that would be an interesting clip just to give you an idea as to what our intelligence services were were considering at that time. But also, you notice he said that Tachibana was actually unsuccessful in recruiting Japanese Americans to his cause. And he reported that to his superiors in Japan, saying that the Japanese here are almost fully assimilated into American culture, and they're not prime targets for recruitment. And one more just interesting fact, just to add some color to this. Tachibana, for part of the time that he was in the United States, was employed as a chauffeur to a prominent British American actor. And I'm not sure if you can see how the picture very well, but can anyone guess who that is? In the middle that he was working for? It's Charlie Chaplin. But anyway, just to give you an idea as to the circles that he was walking in Los Angeles and throughout Hollywood. Another issue of concern for American authorities were the Japanese societies operating within the United States. Now, when I say Japanese societies, this encompasses a wide range of groups. Most of them were simply cultural or patronage groups operating in the Japanese communities. However, there were a few that really alarmed the FBI. One of them was the Heimushikai, which was a society of Japanese military veterans and their families. And what they were doing throughout the 1930s is they were asking for donations from people within the Japanese communities to donate money to the families of those killed in the Sino-Japanese War. So these were donations given to families in Japan who had lost their sons in the war. Now, of course, this is just, a community organization, but we have the bank records from this in the FBI files. And again, the FBI analysts in DC could not really discern whether or not this was simply a patriot organization or were they truly deliberately funding the Japanese war efforts. So there was a lot of confusion about that, and the amounts of money that were going to Japan were significant. So again, yet another thing that added to the alarmism. And then, of course, December 7th, 1941, we had the attack on Pearl Harbor. And immediately up to Pearl Harbor and then in the immediate aftermath of it, there are some interesting things to note here. On November 7th, there was a report by presidential investigator Curtis Munson, who was submitted to the President, State Department, and the Secretary of War. And Munson attested to the fact that Japanese Americans held an extraordinarily high degree of loyalty to the United States, even the first generation Issei. And then on December 8th, of course, the United States declared war on Japan, and on December 11th, they declared war on Germany and Italy. And the Western Defense Command was established under the command of Lieutenant General John DeWitt. And then, of course, amidst the confusion and rumors of espionage and subversion, U.S. allies were continuously suffering defeats in the Pacific, and fear was spreading throughout the United States. And on January 5th, the U.S. War Department classified Japanese American men of legal age as 4C enemy aliens, which meant that they could no longer consider citizenship. But then immediately following this, on January 26th, a report by Navy Lieutenant Commander Ken Ringel was submitted to the War Department. And I urge anyone to read this report. It's only about 15 pages. But in that report, Ken Ringel, who had served as a U.S. naval attaché in China years before, and he understood the Japanese American community very well, he made two key observations. One, that the second generation, Issei, were full American citizens and were fully loyal to the United States, but that even their parents, the Issei generation, although they may have social and cultural allegiances to Japan, they would never commit any material harm to the United States because they understand that the future of their children rests here, and they would never jeopardize that. Now I'd like to go into just some of the people who were most directly responsible for Japanese internment. The first was Colonel Carl Benditson, who was a lawyer in the U.S. Army JAG Corps, and he is the individual who drafted the legal justification for Japanese internment. Now, at first, it did not target Japanese specifically. It was a sweeping recommendation that Americans of Italian and German descent as well should be put in internment camps. But given the sheer size of people who shared Italian or German heritage in the United States, that would be simply impossible. Also because of the fact that both of those groups had large political constituencies in the United States. There were so many people of German or Italian descent who were representatives in government. There was simply no way that that was practical. And of course, Benenson was on the staff, and he was the staff judge advocate of General John DeWitt, who ultimately became the commander of Western Defense Command in the United States. And I'd say this man has been caricatured quite a bit, and I'm not going to defend him in any way, but just to put into context some of his more notable public statements. This is perhaps the most infamous one, where he was testifying on April 13, 1943, in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee, where he said, "A Jap's a Jap, there is no way to determine their loyalty. This coast is too vulnerable," etc. Now, it's important to note the date of that, April 13, 1943. This is more than a year and a half, or almost a year and a half, after Pearl Harbor, and we already had Japanese internment camps ongoing for about a year. Prior to this, DeWitt had never made any sort of racially charged statements like this. And I think that in this case, it was sort of covering his backside, if you know what I mean. I think by this time, he and most other people in the government realized what a mistake internment was of all Japanese Americans. And I think this was just a desperate attempt for him to justify his actions. And then, of course, the part of President Roosevelt. And it's interesting to note that even Roosevelt's own Attorney General, Francis Biddle, and we know this now from declassified cabinet meeting notes, is that Biddle strongly advised against Japanese internment. And he told Roosevelt that the American people, if they fully understood what you're doing, will never stand for this. And so Congress would never pass a law to incarcerate American citizens. So he said, if you're going to do it, the only way to do it is through executive order. And of course, that is what Roosevelt ultimately did. And then, of course, immediately after Pearl Harbor, the United States declared martial law in the territory of Hawaii. And this was the longest duration of martial law ever declared in the United States or in American territory. And I think it's worth noting because when they declared martial law, they removed the elected governor of the territory of Hawaii and replaced him with a United States Army general. And another interesting fact is that the United States removed all official U.S. currency from the territory of Hawaii and replaced it with a reserve currency. And I'm not sure if you can see it, but on these notes, on these treasury notes, Hawaii is stamped across it. And the reason they did this is because they were still worried that Japan might take the islands of Hawaii. And if they did that, they did not want a massive amount of U.S. currency to fall in their hands. They wanted a reserve currency that they could just cancel immediately if that happened. It's also important to note that this was not the first time that the United States declared martial law and imprisoned Americans without due process. During the Civil War, on April 27, 1861, Abraham Lincoln declared martial law and ordered the suspension of habeas corpus. And he also imprisoned more than 13,000 anti-war protesters in Fort Lafayette, New York. Most of them were held for the entire duration of the war, and hundreds died from malnourishment and neglect. So again, it's a very sad episode in American history, but again, it was not the first time. Hawaii was not the first time that martial law was declared. And here you get a slightly better outline of the exclusion zone area where people were evacuated. So now we get into the experience of the Japanese internees. And sorry, I'll try to rush through this as quickly as I can. They were only given a few weeks' notice to leave their homes and to report to the to the internment camps. And many of them were forced to sell their homes, their businesses, their vehicles, all their possessions for just pennies on the dollar. So these people lost everything they had as this occurred. And as you can imagine, the arrival of the camp was very chaotic. The barracks in which they were housed were still not finished yet, and they were very Spartan-like accommodations. And one of the things that is shown in the history books is, of course, these very poor quality barracks that they were housed in here. There was no insulation at the beginning. There was no running water or plumbing. They all had to go to outhouses, and they were just sleeping on cots at the time. But within 1 year, the living conditions improved dramatically. You can see right here from one of the housing blocks in Manzanar. Only 1 year after, they had converted it basically into small family unit apartments. So it is not correct to assume that they were just treated with disregard or neglect. After people were settled and everything calmed down, many organizations in the government, including the War Relocation Authority, which was run by Milton Eisenhower, the brother of Dwight Eisenhower, they went to extraordinary lengths to make sure that people were well housed and taken care of. And this is just an interesting painting by an artist who lived in Manzanar, Kango Takamura. You can see the side-by-side comparison. On the left side is a painting from the mess hall line in year one, and you can, of course, just see how chaotic and disorganized it is. But then, only 1 year later, the painting on the right shows how things were much more organized, and people had really adjusted to camp life. And then, of course, in the life in these camps, people just built their own self-sustaining communities. They realized they had thousands of children. They couldn't just let them run around aimlessly. So every single internment camp established kindergarten through high schools. And they brought in teachers. Some people volunteered for both within and outside the camps to teach children in every subject. And they were graduating people from high schools as the camps went on. And of course, everyone's experience in camp was different, and of course it differed greatly by generation. Of course, the impact of this on older generations was devastating. People lost their homes, their businesses, and some people, if they were elderly, many died in camp if they were near the end of their life. However, the impact that it had on children in camp was very different. Because many of the people, if you listen to any of the oral histories of people who were children in the internment camps, they didn't have a full understanding of what was going on. And once things settled down in camp and they were in schools and in their after-school activities, they had a wonderful time. Many of them formed lifelong friendships with people, and they really made the most of it. And of course, as you can see, they had full social lives. They had high school dances, they had sports clubs, and then of course the big pastime in all the internment camps, most of Manzanar was the baseball league. And here you can see a photo of the Hart Mountain baseball team. They won the league pennant 2 years in a row. This was the team from Hart Mountain, Wyoming. And they published a number of books on baseball leagues in the internment camps, and just how much it brought the communities together. And then another inspiring thing was what was known as the art of Vermont. There were many artisans, painters, sculptors in the camps, and as time went on, they had plenty of time to make beautiful paintings, sculptures, pendants, and the Japanese American Museum in Sacramento houses the art of Vermont right now. It's a beautiful exhibit if you're ever able to go out there and see it. And one of the most controversial things that happened in camp was the loyalty questionnaire, which they administered to all the residents in the second year. And two of the questions that really provoked a lot of controversy was whether or not people agreed whether to be loyal or not to the United States. And overwhelmingly, people answered yes. But even the ones that answered no, it wasn't out of desire that they were not loyal to the United States. It's that they were outraged that they were even being asked this question. They were protesting, why would I start loyalty to a nation of which I am a citizen and I am now being imprisoned without due process. So unfortunately, several thousand of the people who answered no on these loyalty questionnaires were removed from the main internment camps and sent to a prison camp called Tule Lake, and they were held there for the duration of the war. And then, of course, in January 1943, the United States Army agreed to establish a unit for all Japanese American soldiers, and this unit was combined with Americans from the mainland and Japanese from the state of Hawaii, and it was combined to form the 442nd Regiment. And my great uncle served in this regiment. They served in Italy and France, and they were the most decorated unit in the United States military to this day for any unit of their size. And you can see some of the records here. They won 21 Medals of Honor, 29 Distinguished Service Crosses, but the thing of note is they received more than 4,000 Purple Hearts. And their casualty ratio was just enormous. Most of the camps were shut down in 1945 before the war had even officially ended, but the last internment camp to close its doors was Tule Lake in March 20th of 1946. And then, of course, the legacy of internment were several Supreme Court cases, probably the most notable of which is the Korematsu case. Korematsu, of course, resulted in the overturning of Executive Order 9066 and it established precedent that American citizens and permanent legal residents cannot be held without due process. There's some of the details of the Korematsu case. And then, of course, in 1988, with the passing of the Civil Liberties Act by President Reagan, Japanese were then given reparation for the internment during World War II. And I always like to end on a positive note. This is George Sakata, who's a dear friend of my family's, and he served in the 442nd and was a Medal of Honor winner. And I talked with George many times over the years. Unfortunately, I never did an official oral history with him. But one thing he always said to people was, we can never forget the past, but the future is far more important. And it just shows that even a man who had been interned himself with his family and has served in war and had been wounded and lost friends, he's always maintained a sense of optimism and a deep love for this country. And so that is something I think we need to always communicate with our students. And I have some recommended reading afterwards. If you want to get to deep perspectives, I would recommend Farewell to Manzanar, which was a first-hand account by Gene Markatsuki, who lived in Manzanar, and then, of course, one of my mentors, Brian Hayashi, wrote Democratizing the Enemy, which if you want to know every detail possible about internment, I highly recommend that book. It's quite a heavy read, but it's about that thick. With that, I will open it up to questions. Sorry, I'm a bit long, but thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Yes. So, this obviously happened in a time that we're not as advanced technologically or socially as now. But do you think toxic nationalism at that point escalated this internment camps? And do you think in the future, do you think we would be wise enough to see something like this that we're approaching in society?
I think there's no question that, yes, it absolutely fueled it. Also, the fact that information did not travel nearly as fast then as it does now. And now, of course, people saw the horrors of Pearl Harbor firsthand in movie theaters when they showed the newsreels. And as you can imagine, as I showed, there were newspaper stories about what was going on in China for nearly a decade. But at the same time, people were still pretty far removed from what was happening. You still did not get a lot of the nuance of what was happening, but also we as a country were still geographically separated at the time. Most people, they did not live on the west coast of the United States, in California, Oregon, Washington. Most of them were not familiar with the Japanese American community. So I think when you have this separation from people who were making decisions or analyzing this information in Washington, or maybe in some of our overseas embassies or consulates, they're removed from it. And I don't think we're getting a full picture of the people that didn't know them. And of course, the people who did know them, a lot of their information, their recommendations were simply not getting up to the top. So I think that's another thing. Could it happen again today? I mean, again, I'm a historian, so in historic profession, you never say anything is inevitable. Nothing is inevitable. I would simply say that it would be far more difficult today, given the speed of which information travels, how quickly we can gather information on these things, and just public response. I mean, I think now we're living in a time when people have information just instantly being into the palm of their hands. They can also express their opinions as well. And as I mentioned, Roosevelt did a highly choreographed propaganda campaign to minimize public's access to information, which today is, again, not impossible, but it's less likely. Yes.
What about Japanese Americans in Hawaii? Were they detained at any time?
So the question was, were Japanese in Hawaii detained? And the answer is yes and no. So one of the other controversies that's debated is that there were no official internment camps or mass incarceration of Japanese in Hawaii. And the public reason that they gave for it at the time, and it is still published today, is that Japanese in Hawaii made up roughly 1/3 of the labor force in Hawaii. And the governor, as well as many business leaders in Hawaii, said, you can't do this here, that the economy will collapse. Now, that was a reason, but it was not the reason. Now, there were a few hundred Japanese in Hawaii who were detained who had affiliations with some of these Japanese societies, and they were seen as threats by the government. But for the most part, Japanese were not interned. But, as I said, what people do not understand is that the restrictions that were placed on Hawaiians throughout the period of martial law, Hawaii was locked down. Mail was either censored or just not permitted to get out. There were curfews for all Hawaiians, it didn't matter their ethnic background. Radio stations were shut down. Telephone lines telephone calls were heavily restricted. So, in effect, Hawaii was one large internment camp, if you will, and they did not want the mainland United States to know about that. So, yes, there were practical reasons, but also simply the fact that Hawaii was in such hard lockdown, it really wasn't even necessary for them to incarcerate people.
I'd like to welcome our student guests. We are honored to have you here. Wish you have the best of luck. We welcome all of our guests. Next meeting, March 10th, on the Historic WWII Foundation with Executive Director Eric Swanson. Don't forget, if you haven't sponsored a table for the youth citizen luncheon, you're missing out. We need your help, though, seriously. Now, if you'll stand and recite the 4-way testimony. Is it the truth? Rotary is adjourned.